Hey photo friend, Phil Ebener here. Today I have another photo editing challenge. Here's the photo that we'll all be working on today. This is a photo from wesaturate.com that you can find there, or if you're in the Photography and Friends Facebook group, which is available to anybody in any of our photography classes, you can access this photo there. I'll post a link to our courses and to that group down in the description if you're not in it. The way that you get into the group, if you have to be in any of our photo classes, and there are instructions on how to get in at the beginning of our classes. So we hope to see you in a class too. That'd be great. So if you see this photo, just a standard kind of portrait, I really like the photo, and we're just gonna go with it. Like I usually do, this is the first time that I'm seeing this photo, editing this photo. So just like you, if you were to take a photo or find a photo, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this photo, but we'll see. So let's get straight into it. I'm editing in Lightroom Classic. You can follow along using whatever app you want. The first thing I do typically is crop. So this is actually a decently composed photo if you like centering your subject. So it's actually kind of nice leading lines towards him with the bricks, even this out of focus building over here, but he's a little too centered for me. So I'm going to crop over to the right hand side. I like having the negative space, so all this area without much detail in it, on the side of his face where he's looking. So this is a lot different in terms of balance compared to this, right? Now, this is actually kind of a cool, a little bit more dramatic look. The other cool thing I like about this view is you get a little bit more of this brick, which is a little bit interesting to me, but also you get his face on the intersection of that rule of thirds line, which is a natural point that our eyes are drawn to in any sort of image. So this compared to this, I think this is a little bit more interesting to me. So it's not necessarily what I would normally do, but just playing around with this, looking at this image, I like it. In terms of exposure, which is the next kind of edits that I typically make, it's a really balanced photo, and it's kind of nice, just how it is. There's things I might do, just boost the shadows just a little bit. I don't even know if I want to. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But do I want to make it more contrasty or less contrasty? Boost the shadows, even boost the blacks a little bit. I don't want to overexpose. So this would be like before and after. This would be a more flat image. I think I'm going to go for the more contrasty. So I'm going to bring the blacks down, the shadows down a little bit further, bring the highlights up, and the whites are just going to be a little bit down below just so that we're not peaking. Those aren't overexposed. So I like that in terms of exposure overall. I could also take my overall exposure down just a little bit. And then I might do some things just to his face area to boost that exposure and make it pop a little bit more. Typically for portraits, you're wanting to draw your audience's attention to their face and maybe specifically to their eyes. Normally, that's where you want your audience to go. So right now, it's pretty much going towards that, but we can do things in editing to further enhance that. In terms of things like clarity, dehaze, I'm not really going to play with these for the overall photo. For this portrait, dehaze isn't something that I generally recommend doing for portraits, because when you do that, you start to get a lot more detail in the blemishes that might appear or in just people's pores and things. It just doesn't look that pretty. Vibrance, saturation, I'm going to leave, especially with saturation. When I boost the saturation, you start to get a lot more of that red, which is nice in the brick, but not so much in the face. So I'm going to leave that. Overall, white balance is actually spot on. I think white balance looks great, so I'm going to leave that as is. All right, tone curve, going to skip for now. HSL, again, this is something where I maybe could boost the reds and the brick, But as I do that, you get the reds in his face, which I don't like. So I'm going to do a lot more edits with more adjustment brushes and things like that. Split toning might be something I play with later on to get more of a stylized look with the colors, but for now I'm going to leave it. All the rest of these, effects, transform, lens correction, detail, just going to leave as is. There's not really much noise in this image. It's very clean, so I don't really need noise reduction, and this is just the standard sharpening that Lightroom adds to raw photos, so that's good. What I'm going to work on next is just enhancing some parts of his facial features, and then also removing a couple of these blemishes. So zooming in there, going to my healing brush, so that little icon there, clicking heal, and then just clicking and dragging around these sort of pimples, which are things that, usually I don't get rid of. Oh, that one didn't work. Don't get rid of a lot of things, moles, freckles, those kinds of things. But a pimple, I think that's something that he might want to get rid of on a photo, but maybe not. So this is definitely something, if you're taking photos of a person, you want to make sure that they are on board with that. All right. We're also going to do, I'm not going to do that. So I just remove those. We can see the before and after, before, after. All right, so another thing we can do to kind of just soften his skin, make it look a little bit better, not as detailed, is with an adjustment brush. Lightroom, the latest versions, has a preset for skin softening. So soften skin, it's under this drop down next to effect, or you can just do it on your own by dropping clarity down to -100 and sharpness up to 25. Now I'm just going to increase this brush size like so. Just brush over his skin. This is one where I could turn on my mask overlay with that box right there, but it's pretty easy to see when you're applying this. See, that was a little bit too much. I think I need to decrease the size of my brush. Brush on here. Press Z to zoom in. Brush over here. Now I don't want to make like his beard soft, which is basically what this is doing, is with the clarity, is decreasing some of the sharpness, the detail. Fix this bit up here just a little bit. Go back to my brush. All right, so let's turn this on and off. So there you can kind of see what it looks like. If it looks like a little bit too overpowering to you, which we can see the before and after, I think if you would just see this photo like this, you wouldn't think anything of it. But when I'm doing the before and after, I think, wow, that's pretty intense. I might just back off some of the clarity like so. Maybe just decrease the saturation just a little bit to get rid of some of that red. Actually, I think I'm going to leave it. What I might do, just to get rid of a little bit of red in his face, is what I go to is just our overall HSL panel here. We're going to take our color picker, go into like a red spot, and then drop it down. So something like that. Now, when we do that, that gets rid of some of the red over here in the brick, which is fine. Just like so, just the red specifically. I'm going to just actually use the slider to use the red specifically. Because what we can actually do is use something like this radial filter. Let's reset this. Double click the effect. And now we're selecting everything outside of his face. And we can boost the overall saturation. Now there's different ways to do this. Actually, a better way would probably be to brush it on or use a graduated filter like this. And then a range mask for color. There we go. We're gonna erase the part of his face that's being selected. All right, so this was very quick. I'm going through this, but I'll explain in just a second, and then boost the saturation back. Or even go in and add a little bit of red. Not too much like that, but just a little bit more red. Okay, so now let's see, we can see the before and after with this. Just bring back some of that information. So what I did was I used a graduated filter with a range mask for that red to just select that red, and then a saturation and a color adjustment to bring back that red, which I like. All right, so now we have decreased the red in his face, but we have the red in the background. Good. I'm sure there's other ways that I could have done that too. So if you know of other ways, let me know in the comments, because there might be an easier way. All right, so let's look at, again, continuing to look into his face. We want to make his eyes pop even more. So with our brush, we're going to make a new one. There's another brush called Iris Enhance, which is basically a clarity, saturation, and exposure adjustment. We're going to turn on auto mask. Let's turn on our mask overlay so we can see. Also notice that his back eye is a little bit out of focus. What we're going to do is boost our sharpness. And we're going to just try to enhance the natural color of his eye, which is kind of a green. So I'm going to make our temperature a little bit cooler, and then our tint a little green too. Actually, I could do it with the temperature slider, or I could do it with this color. So if we find sort of like a green we like, which is probably more of like a yellowish green, something like this. So we can see the before and after. See how that makes his eyes pop just a little bit more? Might be a little bit too green, but when compared to his natural color of his eyes, but I like it. All right, now let's kind of, again, try to focus our attention on his face. So with another radial filter, new, we're going to create sort of a vignette just around his face. So we're selecting everything around him, and we're just going to decrease the exposure. Overall exposure, and then just the shadows separately. I don't want it to look too dramatic, so I'm boosting the highlights. So it's basically bringing the overall exposure down a little bit, but still maintaining the contrast. Now it might be a little bit too much on his shoulder, so what I'm going to do is click brush, erase. Then with my flow down just a little bit, you can see with the flow down, it allows me to kind of paint on or paint off in brush strokes rather than one fell swoop. You have to paint over a few times for it to completely get removed, this adjustment. So something like that looks a little bit better. So see how just doing that, again, it just draws our attention to his face a little bit more. Another thing I'm going to do while I'm doing this is just decrease the sharpness. So everything is a little out of focus, a little bit more so. Even though the depth of field is pretty spot on just his face, we're still just adding a little bit of out of focus blurriness to the rest of this photo so that we're drawn towards his face even more. I'm going to click new. We're going to make this a little bit more extreme. So we're going to add a radial filter just around his eyes like so. And again, we are going to decrease our sharpness all the way. So right now, everything is out of focus except for his eyes, right? So what we're going to do now is take a brush and erase the parts we want to be in focus. So we want his lips to be in focus. Probably his ear just a little bit more. It still can be a little bit out of focus, but I think that's a little bit better. his beard down here. So you can kind of see what this overlay looks like. Maybe the tip of his cap. It's just adding a little style to this and editing. Now, this is a decision. Do we want his shirt down here to, yeah, maybe just this part of his shirt, just that sliver of the shirt. Maybe I did a little bit too much. Yeah, something like that's pretty good. So again, we are just drawing our attention to his face. And I think that's looking pretty good. I actually really like the balance of the red with his green eyes. His green eyes really, really pop. Let's get in here and see if we can pop them, make them pop just a little bit more. We're gonna do a new adjustment brush, and now we're just gonna go in to the whites of the eyes. They're already pretty white. Oops, went a little bit too far with that one. Sometimes it's easier to brush on and then erase off what you don't want to select. I hope you're enjoying this tutorial. If you're enjoying it, hit that like button. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe. Please leave a comment. Those are the things that let me know whether I should continue to make these kinds of tutorials or not. All right, so now we have the whites of the eyes selected. So to make these enhanced, whatever you want to call it, we're going to boost the exposure just a little bit. Not to go crazy, because if you do that, he starts to look like Alien. And then decrease the saturation overall. Just, again, this gets rid of some of that red in the veins and stuff that you might see. So before, after. Again, just making his eyes pop even more. Going into his lips, we're going to make his lips pop a little bit more, give a little color. So, I'm gonna brush on like this, turn on my mask overlay. I didn't really need the auto mask on, helps a little bit. All right, so obviously this isn't the color we're going for, but that's just the overlay. What I want to do is just boost the color a little bit. What we can do is just add saturation. That can help. Or add tint, some magenta to the tint. I feel like that is actually a pretty good color for just natural lip color. Maybe a little bit of warmth so it's not too pink or magenta. And it's just a balance, and maybe overall exposure just dropping just a little bit. You can see using all of these, we can, really, obviously that's not good. But you can really play with the color. We just want to make his lips stand out a little bit. Maybe not the warmth. So before and after. And like always, it's a good idea to step away and come back to this photo when you're done. Because now I'm looking at it and it's like, man, that softening of his cheeks, it's a little dramatic. The whites of his eyes maybe a little bit too much. Lips, on the other hand, I think what we did was pretty good. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. In terms of a basic portrait edit, this is a pretty solid job, I would say. I'm pretty happy with it. If I wanted to go a little bit more creative with the colors, what I would do is go down to the split toning. This allows us to add color tone to color to just the highlights and then just the shadows separately. So what I typically do with this is first try to find the right colors, and then I adjust how saturated and the balance they have. So what I mean by that is I'll click this little box here, and then I'll just drag up at the very top of this box to find kind of a color for the highlights that I like. Sort of a typical color split toning that I use is kind of adding warmth, yellow to the highlights, and then coolness to the shadows. So I'm happy with that color. maybe something like that. And then the shadows, I just, again, click and drag through. That's pretty cool. Somewhere like that. So now the balance is off. So there's a couple of things we can do. We could play with this balance slider, which makes the shadow adjustment more powerful or the highlight adjustment more powerful. And that can help find a better balance, but the colors are still just too powerful. So what I would do then is just drop the saturation on these sliders. I'm not trying to make it look completely unnatural. It's giving it a style. And that's looking pretty good to me. So before and after, you can kind of see the style. We could also see the before and after this way. So definitely giving that kind of style to it, right? All right. I'm pretty happy with this. I'm happy with this style. The only thing that I'm not so happy with now is just, it's a little muted. It's a little dull. So what I'm going to do is, with this tone curve, just bring up my exposure, bring back down my shadow just to create a little bit more contrast. And there we have it. Before, after. Definitely more stylized. You might look at this and say, hey, I like the original better. The split toning, it's always one of those things where I look at it again and I'm like, oh, do I really like that? I think for this one, I am going to leave it just because I think it does look pretty good. I think what I'm going to do, just tinker in here, I'm just going to create another radial filter around his face. His face is already pretty bright, but I'm just going to boost it just a little bit more. Oh, I'm selecting the outside, so I'm going to invert. Maybe bring up the shadows. I don't want to overexpose his face, especially that part. So I might bring the whites down, highlights, shadows up just a little bit. That cheek is a little bit bright, so what we could actually do is brush this adjustment off of that part. Or we could try to bring our whites down just a little bit. Yeah, that's looking pretty good to me. All right, I hope you enjoyed this edit as I make a couple minor adjustments. I'm going to sign off, let you guys go. I hope to see your own photos. Again, if you're a part of the Photography and Friends community, post it. There will be a post in the announcements for this month, which I'm editing this in October. Yeah, October of 2019. If you're watching this in the future, you will probably find another editing challenge in the group to follow along. But if you're watching this off of the group or in a course, I would love to see your work too. You can share it with me on social media, tag me on Instagram, however you want to share it with me. Thanks so much for watching. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you in another lesson.